We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. So, how's the Donald done in his first 4 weeks as president? Here's what he said before this week's big speech.
I think I get an A in terms of what I've actually done, but in terms of messaging, I'd give myself a C or a C+.
How are you going to change that, then?
Well, maybe I change it during the speech.
Well, I daren't ask how you guys would mark my first 4 weeks on The Pledge. Personally, I'd also give myself an A for debating skills, but perhaps an A- for persuading you, Greg. On the show this week...
A- sounds quite high to me.
OK, Michelle's going to ask if there's life after tax. Greg's threatening to utter the R word. Graham's going to give us all an F- for saving the planet. And Afua says the Oscars actually got it right. But first, it's my big speech. I want to talk about doctors. Those people who hold the power of life and death in their hands, who in this country are still revered as gods, as special beings, as saint-like saviours. I want to know why, when they cock up, i.e. when people die needlessly, their special status allows their mistakes to be hidden, not just from the world, but from their patients, who have every right to know who's treating them. This week we heard the GP, Joanne Rowe, refused to see a 5-year-old girl with chronic asthma because she was a few minutes late for her appointment. That little girl, let's give her a name, Ellie Mae Clark, died a few hours later. But instead of exposing Rowe's callousness, instead of questioning her right to even be a doctor, she was disciplined in secret, a process designed to help doctors avoid the stress of public exposure. So, a little girl's life is lost, and Joanne Rowe's punishment was a 6-month paid holiday and a 294-word written warning. How can that be? How can a child die needlessly, yet the person who should have helped is allowed to carry on, courtesy of medical bodies who appear to care more about the reputation of doctors than the lives of their patients?
Carol, well, it's such a tragic case, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't read about what happened to this little girl, Ellie Mae Clark, and not be moved.
Yeah.
It's so sad and, you know, every parent's nightmare. But I think that I would be really weary of having a knee-jerk reaction that kind of blames the medical profession for everything that goes wrong in the NHS, because it seems to me like there were problems with this doctor, and, you know, we've seen some of the details of the case. I mean, she routinely dismissed patients who were late, even when they were coming for an emergency appointment. Now, that doesn't sound right to me. But on the other hand, and so not in any way to excuse the actions of this doctor, there are reasons why doctors are so hard about appointments and punctuality. And one of the reasons is that we know they're under tremendous pressure. You know, they have 10 minutes per patient. That was, a report came out recently showing that we have one of the shortest appointment rates in Europe in terms of giving attention to individual patients. There's so much pressure to save time on appointments, to pack as many people in, that you can see how doctors would end up making, in my view, sometimes wrong decisions about whether to see patients or not. And also, just looking at the bigger picture of the medical profession, I think, speaking personally, I don't know a single doctor who became a doctor, especially a GP, other than because they wanted to help people.
My biggest beef about this doctor was disciplined in secret. We would never have got to know about
just before
this.
we bring everyone else in, can I just say, I think that you're conflating a lot of different issues here. One is what happened with this doctor, and I've said I agree with you.
Well,
it seems to me that was a bad decision, and she has been disciplined. There's another issue about whether that should be done transparently in public, which I personally think it should. And then there's another issue about the general conditions that doctors are working in and the kind of pressures that they're under. And I mean, I don't know if that's what you want to talk about, Greg.
I mean, obviously it's a tragic case. You know, there's no doubt about that. I look at it from my own experience and coaching young players. When a group of young players come to me for the first time, I am obliged to find out if there's any medical history with any of those young players. And if they turn up and they don't have their medication, in this case asthma medication, I won't let them train with me. It's my safeguarding responsibility not to let a child put himself or herself in a position where they could have an asthma attack. And we know asthma attacks are treated as life-threatening conditions. What concerns me is I think the system throughout this, even before she got to the hospital, to the doctors, I should say, I would say, how do you put in place the fact that this girl has got a medical history, and what are the interventions that are put in place to sort of make sure that she doesn't end up in a serious medical condition? And I think that the culture in the doctors clearly failed her. Yeah. Absolutely. But I do think we have to also understand that there should be processes in place that doesn't happen. And part of that is even the receptionist on the doctor's surgery, the culture within that in that doctor's surgery. If people don't feel comfortable going and talking to the doctor because of whatever reason, because of barriers, then again you're failing the patient. So I think it's a combination of things that led to this tragedy. But equally, I do think we have to also get a balance between punishing the medical profession for situations that aren't solely their responsibility.
But this was the little girl who'd been sent home from school sick, who got in there. She was a few minutes late. No decent doctor sends away. Let me just tell you what the GMC said in their written warning to her. They said, your failure to see and assess this child does not meet with the standards required of a doctor. It risks bringing the profession to disrepute and must not be repeated. And it says, whilst this failing in itself is not so serious as to require any restriction on your registration, it's necessary in response to issue this formal warning. What can be more serious than a 5-year-old child dying? There can be nothing more serious. And in terms of punishment...
Carol, have you ever made a mistake?
Yes, but my job isn't about life or death. My job isn't about life or death.
But you make mistakes.
No one makes mistakes.
You've made mistakes.
Of course I have.
We've all made mistakes. We're lucky. We don't work in an area where someone could die because of that. But if you think every time a doctor makes a mistake, and doctors will make mistakes, they should be hung out to dry publicly.
Exactly.
I think you're wrong.
But this was a mistake. This was a decision she made. She shouted through the surgery, she's late, I'm not going to see
but
her.
it's still...
That's not a mistake.
Well, it is a mistake.
It's a decision she made.
It's a part of the culture. Unfortunately, it's part of the culture of that practice. Obviously, I don't know the practice, so I'm assuming that's the case.
No.
To Greg's point, we have to make sure we create a culture where we learn from mistakes, a bit like the airline industry, where they have a more open culture to mistakes so that they learn from them very quickly, because they know if planes fall out the sky for whatever reason, that's not good for business. Okay, we've got to adopt the same culture within our health service, where people who are dealing with very difficult situations can be reviewed. Sorry, let me finish. Can be reviewed to make sure that everything that they did in their power to keep that to do the right thing was done, and then you have to say, we understand and we learn from it and we move on.
But the point you're missing is that these hearings, many of these hearings, are held in private, which means you guys never get to know. OK, so let's just ask...
I agree with that.
Let me ask you two girls
agree with
here.
that.
So you're going to have a check-up for you're going to have a smear test, or you're going to have your breast checked. Wouldn't it be good for you to know if that doctor had been up on the charge of sexual misconduct? But wouldn't you want to know that? But with these secret hearings, you're never going to know that, because they're going to be disciplined with a warning.
I don't want to know the ins and outs of people's accusations. What I want to know is the outcome. So if someone's been accused of something as a disciplinary, in my eyes, that should be held in private whilst the facts are ascertained, the output is decided, and then if that person is concluded guilty of something, misconduct, wrongdoing, whatever, then of course I want that transparency as a user of the service. But if you get falsely accused of something, for example, and I'm not talking about this case, I'm talking generally.
Every day, Michelle.
But I'm not talking about court. I'm talking about disciplinaries in private.
This is the point. It's not. Is it fair? I mean, I've employed a lot of people over time. I've had people take us to industrial tribunals. A lot of the time they were deeply unfair, yet all the publicity was about their case as opposed to about your defence, by and large. And your sort of belief that everything should be held in public because that's the only way you get accountability. I just don't trust.
If one of you guys mistakenly hit someone with a car tomorrow, it was an accident, you made a mistake, you hit someone with a car tragically, you would have your backside dragged into court before you knew what had happened, as you rightly should, until the facts are looked at, until it's decided whether or not you're guilty. And that's what doctors should face that too.
I think the difference between running into someone with your car is that when you sign up to being a doctor, which is a difficult thing to do, that requires... You could earn more money doing something else in most cases. Many people do it because they're passionate about it as a vocation. Yes. One of the things you're signing up to is that you will be in life and death situations daily, possibly, and that people's lives will be in your hands. Now, Everybody makes mistakes. I'm not excusing this doctor. No, you said that it wasn't a mistake. It was a mistake. She made a decision.
She made a decision.
She
not
made
to
a
see
mistake.
sick child.
I'm sure if you asked that doctor, do you think that was the right decision now, she'd say it wasn't.
Well,
Nobody wants a child to die on their
enough,
hands, Carol.
This doctor has never apologised. So we have this set of parents 2 years down the line who are devastated, and this doctor has still not apologised. So if she was sorry and she had made a mistake, she should have said so.
And on that note, I would like to quote some words of wisdom to you guys by one of the founding fathers. As Benjamin Franklin once said, there are only two things certain in life, death and taxes. And I agree with him. What do they say about great minds? We seem to have blended the two and created a third, the death tax. The principle of inheritance tax is something I am deeply opposed to. I want a society where people are encouraged to work hard, achieve things and benefit from that success. When they do, I'd like them to be freely able, should they choose, to share that success with their children upon their death without it incurring further taxation. Why should hard-earned assets or money that has already likely been taxed be taxed again just because somebody has died? I'll keep it simple. It shouldn't be. It's time to give that lasting kiss of death to the unfairness that is inheritance tax.
Michelle, as I understand your argument, you think this money's been taxed already. Is that the case?
Yeah, and I know what you're going to come at me and say. There's double taxation everywhere. It's the principle.
No, I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is actually the truth is most of this money, most inheritance tax is to do with your house, particularly the south of England. It's to do with your house. You haven't paid any tax on the gain you've made on your house. So if you bought it years ago for 100,000 and when you die it's worth $1 million, you've paid no tax on that.
No.
Secondly, if you look at the relief that is now available, actually £1 million house you'll pay no tax on. Well, so you're actually talking about letting off people who have got quite a lot of money. And I've got no problem with taxing that. There's all sorts of ways you can get round inheritance tax to make it fairer. Yeah. There are a lot of people, and a lot of people use it. But in the end of the day, why should your kids just become rich because you became rich? Do you think, in principle, then, that kids should be able to inherit everything that their parents have got?
I think if you work hard, and by the way, as a disclosure, no offence to my parents, but I will inherit nothing, so there's no personal thing here for me. I think that I want people to be encouraged to work really hard, to take risks where required, and sometimes you'll gain from that and sometimes you won't. And actually, when you talk about house prices, they have increased massively. Yeah. Children, particularly in London, will struggle to get on that housing ladder. So should they inherit the house? Yes, they should.
I think there's an interesting dynamic of change here as well, where because house prices have gone up so much, the fact that a family has to sell the asset just to pay for the inheritance tax doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of people. So I can sort of understand. It'd be interesting to see if there's a shift here where we can get rid of inheritance tax but maybe have a capital gains tax on property sales. If it's your primary home, you don't pay any gain. So if you make £500,000, as an example, on your property, if that's your primary residence, you don't pay any tax. Maybe we should introduce a capital gains tax on property and get rid of inheritance tax, because actually it's very complicated. It's pretty meaningless in terms of the overall tax, and it puts the burden on the family to do something that maybe they don't want to do.
But it's not that complicated. In April it's going to change this year, but up to now it's anything over 325 grand is taxed at 40%. You're allowed to have 325 grand worth. Anything over that at 40. I think the shocker for a lot of people is 40%. To most people, they go, oh, that's the government are going to take nearly half. If they just lowered that 40% to maybe 20%, that would people would stomach that a lot more easily, don't you think?
I mean, we've talked about how house prices have gone up a lot. That's very much a southern thing, isn't it? And a lot of this is about the south. And one of the reasons inheritance tax is so unpopular, I know, is with people, say, in the north of England who haven't seen that rise, for whom £325,000 is a lot of money, and therefore this is something that affects well-off people. But what I would say is that I think actually that's often a misperception, because people, like you said, Michelle, work really, really hard. I know people who have worked in the public sector their whole lives on low salaries, have made huge sacrifices just to be able to buy a house and be able to leave something to their families. And I don't know anything about your personal tax affairs, Greg, but people like you who can afford accountants often get round inheritance tax by getting round the 3 to 7 year rule, passing on assets long before they die. And so I think what often happens with inheritance tax is actually it's not the really rich that benefit because they get around it. It's the kind of people in the middle. You know, we hear the cliche of the squeeze middle, but it really is true. People who aren't really well off, they're not this global financial elite. They're just working people who tried really hard.
It's not. Come April this year, every person is going to be allowed 500 grand worth before you have to pay inheritance tax. And so that's between a couple.
It's actually more than that because if your mum and your mum and dad have both died and they passed it on together, and you get the house, it's £1 million.
Yes.
Now, I have to say, I don't...
The squeezed middle don't have that.
The squeezed middle... If you get £1 million, if you can get £1 million first, I don't have a lot of sympathy if you have to pay 40% above that.
But if it's based on the fact that house prices have gone up in your parents' generation, and then you, as the inheritor, if that's the right word, you then have to sell the asset in order to pay the tax. I think that's the bit for me that... I mean, obviously, it gets complicated when you start looking at areas.
You're talking about super rich then?
Because no, you're not. You're talking about a two-parent family with a house worth £1 million. Take a single parent, a single parent with a house worth £600,000.
Yeah, I need to pick up on your point. You've just said we're referring to the super rich with a house over £1 million.
Someone in the north would think you were super rich if you had a house worth too.
I am from the north, and I have a house in the north. I also have a house in London, and my family cannot believe the house prices. Yes. So when you say the super rich, they have a house in London for £1 million, just to put some context into that house for £1 million of a super rich person for anyone that maybe doesn't live in London, you are not super rich to earn a house.
The tax is not going to affect anyone with £1 million.
If you can buy a house that is a decent-sized family house in a decent area for £1 million, you're doing well. You're not super rich to have. And it's unfathomable to, to me as well, that sometimes the house prices in London...
You misunderstood what I said. I said over £1 million. People buying houses over £1 million are rich, OK?
No, they're
Take
not.
the words...
They're not rich, Carol.
It's not just about £1 million.
Ask your mum if someone buying a house worth £1 million is rich.
Do you know what my mum would say? Someone buying a house over £1 million is bonkers.
Yes, exactly.
The house that you get. But you have to, because that is the market.
Well, OK. I think we should... I don't think we'll agree on that.
What you're trying to say is you just disagree with me. You're trying to put it nicely. I hear you.
No, what I'm saying is I think once you get up to talking about £1 million, that you can get £1 million.
I think it's disingenuous to keep talking about £1 million. It's $500,000 per person.
If you've got,
there are a lot of people who are not, especially at that age.
But if you have two parents and they work together, they can use each other's allowance. There's all sorts of things. And you now can have the house as well up to £1 million. So it seems to me.
That's 2020, by the way, that £1 million thing.
Yeah, but I don't have a great deal of sympathy for people having to pay some tax on anything above £1 million. I really don't. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on. It's my turn now. It looks more and more likely that the Scottish Government will demand a second referendum for Scotland once Mrs May triggers Article 50 and begins the process of taking Britain out of the European Union. Now, the British government could say no on the grounds that the last referendum was less than 3 years ago, and then 55% said no to leaving the UK. But, of course, that was before Britain voted narrowly to leave the EU, and 62% of Scots voted to stay in. Nicola Sturgeon would now argue, and I think she is right, that the game has changed, and she should take a gamble on a second Scottish referendum. Whether she would win it is anybody's guess. The latest polls show 51% are still in favour of Scotland staying in the UK, and the economics are probably against her. But, as the vote for Brexit showed, referendums are not only about economic prosperity. If I were living in Scotland, I'd support a new referendum and, given these new circumstances, I'd vote for independence.
I have to agree with you. Next. I remember the day we left the EU, the day of Brexit, I sent out a tweet saying about the things that we needed to do, and that was, avoid recession, avoid mass unemployment, choose new leaders of the Labour and Conservative Party. That was before Cameron sort of stepped away or ran away. And the other thing I said was allow Scotland a second referendum. And I think notwithstanding the outcome of that referendum, that's maybe something we can explore. But the principle of it, I think they're absolutely right in saying, look, you know, we voted to remain in the EU by 62%, and we voted to stay part of the UK 55% before we knew the outcome. Obviously, that was well ahead of the EU referendum. So I think it's their right. It's in the SNP's manifesto, 2014, it was written in there, that depending on how that EU referendum went, they would reserve the right for a second referendum. And I think that they're entitled to. I actually don't think, economically, as you said in your introduction, that it makes sense.
It doesn't make sense.
But I
didn't say it didn't make sense. I'm saying there's an economic argument.
There is, absolutely.
I don't think the Scots are going to be daft enough to vote for independence because they, you know.
Do you think they should be given a second referendum?
Well, yeah, if only to shut Nicola Sturgeon up so she can't keep on bringing up this topic time and time again and using it as a weapon to threaten this government. That's what she does. When she wants something, she threatens a referendum. Yes, maybe Theresa May should give it to her, but I think she talks about this referendum all the time to hide the fact that she's making a mess of running Scotland. It has a massive deficit. It has a £15 billion deficit, which is proportionally twice as much as the UK's deficit. Education is in a mess. Health is in a mess. She's, you know, the oil revenues are like next to nothing now. It's $50 a barrel now. And her whole case for independence was built on the oil industry when it was worth 180 billion quid. Now it's worth barely 60 million
I'm just listening to you, Carol.
So,
what on earth you're talking
about?
What
do you mean, what am I talking about? Because she's doing the Scottish people.
Scottish schools are doing better than English schools.
They're not.
They are. In fact, they're seen as a model.
Education in a mess.
I'm not talking further education.
Well, I am.
You said schools. You said education.
I said education. Further education
are not a mess. The SNP has a majority that's bigger than the Tories and Labour combined. And furthermore, what did Theresa May, well, not Theresa May, it was David Cameron, but what did the government in Westminster promise Scotland during the referendum? They said, if you stay in the UK, we will listen to you, we will treat you as an equal partner, you will be a leader within the UK. That is the absolute opposite of how Westminster has been treating Scotland ever since the EU referendum result. I find the attitude towards Scotland so incredibly patronising. You voted to be in the UK. Whatever we do, no matter how devastating it is for you, you're going to have to follow us.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Michelle, what do you think?
The Scottish people have said they want...
Because we know what Carol wants. So, Michelle...
So, it's no surprise that you are in favour of a referendum. I do know that you like a referendum. I like the Union, and when they had the previous referendum, I really hoped that they would vote to remain, and they did, so I was very pleased about that. I also, however, despite being a fan of the Union and wanting it to, I want the United Kingdom to remain. I think that we're better together without sounding too much like a slogan. But I also understand and respect why a lot of people would want that referendum. I think that the ground has changed a lot. I would have no problem with them having a referendum. And whatever the outcome, I would respect that, because I think where we are now, so many balls are up in the air, and what we need to now be doing is catching these balls and moving forward without these constant uncertainties and threat of this and that.
And unfortunately, we're in an era where self-interest is God and key to every decision. Whether you look across the pond at the States, whether you look here in terms of our attitudes towards, you know, our borders and what have you, we're all much more inward-looking. I can't believe it staggers me how quickly we've become that way. Now, because of that, and I think if we are prepared to sort of use that as an argument for why we chose to leave the EU, then I think we have to uphold those same values to Scotland and say, well, look, if you feel that way, then you should choose as well. We can't have it both ways.
Do you remember Afra said that we don't listen? We were listening, but, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's not listening either. Do you remember? Here, just listen to what she said before the referendum, before the Scottish referendum.
I think the SNP have always said that, in our view, these kind of referendums are once-in-a-generation events. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Scotland, and I hope we seize that opportunity to bring powers home so that we can create the kind of country we want to be.
So a once-in-a-lifetime event. She didn't get the result she wanted, and so she wants to hold another one. Even though you're saying the ground has changed a lot. It hasn't actually percentage-wise. The ground
there's a fundamental difference, and that is the whole of Scotland was based upon being in the EU, and they're now going to be out of the EU. Yeah. And actually, I think that's changed the whole game. And I don't think this thing will ever go away unless you have another referendum. And if you have another referendum after Britain has voted to come out, and as I suspect would happen, Scotland still votes to stay in the United Kingdom, then I think you've put it to bed.
Greg?
Otherwise,
you really think
would you
she would put it
accept
to bed?
that?
oh yes, I think then you've put it to bed, unless there's another.
You won't want another referendum after
No,
that,
the point
would you?
about this is there's been a fundamental change in the position.
Yeah.
Actually,
The terms are different.
Yes, the reason why I think you could end up with a much more successful banking sector and all the rest of it in an independent Scotland that's still in the pound. It would solve the problem of a lot of people in the city.
How will it survive?
That's up for them to decide.
Their public services spend £1,200 more per capita than they're doing. Their standard of living is upheld by Westminster, by the UK.
But that's the argument of the referendum. And if in the end they say we've listened to all that, but we've decided it's in our benefit. Long-term benefit.
She's misleading them.
No, hang on.
It's not.
So you know better than she does.
Well,
you know better than the people in Scotland.
I see what's happening in Scotland.
That's their
It's
choice.
supposed to be a debate about whether Scotland should have another referendum, not about whether they should stay in the EU or not. The point of a referendum is that they would decide. But the point for me is, just to put this all in a context, the argument keeps being made that trade for Scotland within the UK is worth 4 times more than trade with the EU, right? That is based on a UK within the EU. The game has changed. Who knows what will happen to the UK economy once we leave the EU? Scotland has the right to determine whether it wants to hedge its bets on being on its own in Europe, or whether it wants to be out of Europe.
And as we're finding out, it is a toss of a coin, because none of us know what's coming down the road.
No, we don't. But
and so surely you're then better, as I said, off the back of Brexit and the motives behind that, and how we're now trying to readjust ourselves to what things are going to look like in the future and adapt. I think they should be given the same opportunity. The clip that you showed there about Nicola Sturgeon, she also said that in the manifesto, which was in 2014, the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. That's in their manifesto. So although she said that, and she was inaccurate in that sense, according to her own manifesto, I think it was absolutely on the table when Scotland held that first referendum.
She's telling Scots that they can still be part of the EU. That she does not know that. She went to Brussels straight after our referendum. The only person who would see her was Juncker. Tusk wouldn't meet her. Already, the SNP ministers are trying to get meetings with the EU.
He won't
see them.
Are you genuinely saying you don't think the EU would accept Scotland?
Yes, I am saying
in the circumstances we're now in? I think
I think
they'd bite their hand off.
Well, why aren't they talking to them now?
What a way to make the British look ridiculous.
Well, I don't think they take them for that. I don't think they're going to take them on that
definitely not be in the EU if they stay in the UK. So, at least they've got a chance.
Well, that's enough of referendums for this week. We've satisfied Greg. It's me next panel, and I'll be showing you some shocking pictures. And no, they're not of me. I don't think anyone that's seen my defending would argue that I haven't got any bottle. But there is such a thing as too much bottle. Panel, can you guess how many plastic bottles are sold in the UK every day? No silly guesses.
Lots.
Afra?
Every day, 2 million.
2 million.
More than Michelle thinks.
OK.
5 million.
5 million. The answer is 35 million a day, just in the UK. And how many times do we use most of them? Once.
Wow.
OK? Between 8 and 12 million tonnes of plastic ends up in the oceans every year. In fact, by 2050, the rubbish in the sea is likely to weigh more than all the fish. Pictures like this honestly make me feel sick. And that's why I think it's time we have a bottle deposit scheme here in the UK. And it's not difficult. In Norway, you pay 10p deposit on small bottles and 25p on big ones, which you get back when you return the bottles. And guess what? 96% are now recycled. Now, I'm usually optimistic about the future. I very much see that my glass is half full. But if we don't change the way we live, I don't think we've got any reason to be optimistic. In fact, quite the opposite.
We all want to do the right thing. No one wants to have a beach like that. And Personally, I'm a good person where recycling is concerned. I have to be. My husband is a recycling Nazi. I have to wash everything in fairy platinum, so every piece of rubbish I put out is shining. So it's not going to happen in my family. It's not going to happen in most responsible families either. But I think a lot of people now are a little bit recycled out, in the sense that, you know, we can be fined, we can be criminalised if we put rubbish in the wrong bin. I've got 4 bins outside my house. I've got a little 4 and then a little brown thing. If I make a mistake, that's going to cost me 100 quid. If I don't pay that, that's going to cost me 1,000 quid. And I think people get very upset. People who are doing the right thing, we get very upset at the idea that we're going to be fined and criminalised. And I think this bottle thing you're talking about, it sounds like a great idea, and I know it would be working in Norway. Scandinavian countries have been recycling fantastically well for 30 years.
Why?
However, well, because they're a different culture to us. Okay. This bottle thing isn't going to work here. One, because the levy on some of the bottles is going to be 10 pence, on some it's going to be 50 pence. Now, that's just one more job for all of us to do. People don't have time. Now, I'm old enough to remember when 30, 40 years ago, when we used to take bottles back, adults never took them back then, for the simple reason they were too busy.
It doesn't matter who takes them back. It doesn't matter who takes them back. It's the fact that you're changing something, you're changing the mindset that these bottles are valuable, and it doesn't have to be a lot of money, 10p, 25p.
It's a lot
you
of
get
money
that money
for some
back.
people.
Not if you get it back. It's a reward for doing the right thing.
But it's a job. It's a job.
When I heard that Graham was going to be debating this topic, I thought, who's going to disagree with that? I mean, what's not to like? It protects the environment, it protects health, the oceans are in crisis. Carol, you know, you managed to come up with... I mean, I know you said you recycle.
Not from this country,
so
I would suspect.
I just don't think that's a good enough reason. That Scandinavian countries have a different culture, they can manage it, we can't. It's a pathetic excuse. We don't have a choice.
We can't.
We don't have a choice. We have to get with it. You know, I think that... The problem we have in this country is just that we have a wasteful attitude. You know, it's not part of our culture. It's not an intrinsic tradition. It's just something that's evolved. You know, some of those images we saw in the developing world where they're getting a lot of the bulk of the problems from our environmental waste, they don't waste stuff because they can't afford to. You know, every bottle gets reused. Someone uses it for homemade drinks or medicine or storage because it's precious, whereas we just have this incredibly wasteful attitude. And I think it just has to change.
Can I just remind you, we've got a video here which, if you're squeamish, don't watch it. But this is what is at stake and the impact we're having.
These are fulmars that have been found dead on the beach. The post-mortem on the stomach isn't for the squeamish.
There's quite a bit of stuff in here. I'm not sure what it is, but we'll see. So you can see there's a lot of plastic in here.
Goodness me.
So
it is just full of plastic.
Yeah, so this gizzard is basically full of plastic.
And this is happening all over the world. That's happening on our doorstep with our own wildlife. And I just think we have to, as sickening as some people may find those images, I think it's important we show the reality and make the connection between our lifestyles and the impact we have on our environment that's getting ever more, sort of becoming more toxic.
But how do you make it work? I mean, I remember as a kid, you know, long before the masses of plastic bottles, you get Sutton's back, as it was then, on a... We used to go around the back of the off-licence and nick the bottles and then take them around the front and get our Sutton's back, which is quite a good way of seeing you through your childhood. But, I mean, I'm impressed by what's happened on plastic bags and how just charging for plastic bags has made a big difference. But, I mean, this is a logistics problem, isn't it? You know, you look at the number of bottles that are used today, where do they go, who takes them, who gives you the money and the rest of it? I'm sure it can be done. I remember going to Oregon, the first time I ever went to Oregon in my 20s. I was, you know, Oregon, quite a conservative American state, but everybody talked about their bottle laws. Everybody talked. It was a major thing in the supermarkets, great big things where you could put your bottles back and the rest of it. And I don't agree with you that the Scandinavians are a different culture. I think they've just had it for much longer. And I think if you introduced it... I mean, now we've got recycling, which you didn't have 15 years ago, did you? We all fill up the bins.
Michelle?
Well, watching that footage upsets me because I do think that, you know, who do we think we are to endanger the rest of the planet just because we choose to be quite wasteful in our ways? So I think that's, you know, upsetting footage. But For me, it's just like, why can't we just put recycling bins on the street? So if I go to the store, so I think two things to try and change this. Number one, if people continue to use plastic, which, by the way, why can't we just use different packaging?
Exactly.
That's my first point. So just change the packaging, point one. If we don't change the packaging, why can't you just have recyclable bins on the street and you just put it in there?
But there are recycling bins. I mean, in some places there are.
So then why do we
recycling
need
bins
this then?
No, but I feel like I say this a lot, but I'm all about incentives rather than sanctions, you know. So I agree with what you're saying. I think it is draconian for people to get fined for putting their recycling in the wrong bin. I mean, we all make mistakes, and I don't think that's helpful because it makes it seem like a kind of onerous thing. But if you incentivise people by giving the money back if they bring back bottles,
reward and not punishment. But to your point about the packaging, we have to, as consumers, we have to make that change. An example of it is a document, an internal document that Coca-Cola had that we're going to show on the screen now. The first slide is basically their internal document. If you look at the right-hand corner where it says "Fight Back," and then we're going to zoom in on that.
I like a good chart.
And it basically says that, you know, we're going to fight back on those two things. That's, you know, increased collection, they're going to fight back, and recycling targets, they're going to push back on that. This is this internal document. And then an EU scheme for deposit systems. OK, so once that got leaked, they then released a statement saying, and this will come up now, saying, our sustainable packaging review is ongoing, but it's already clear from our conversations with experts that the time is right to trial new interventions such as a well-designed deposit return scheme for drinks containers, starting in Scotland, where conversations are underway. So by that being leaked and it getting into the public domain has changed their processes, both internal and external. And I think that's got to be a good thing, because absolutely right, we look at a bottle and we don't see it as a valuable commodity. Afua said the same thing, that, you know, we're able to not bother about recycling and reusing things.
You know, this government are not actually behind this, because they've already said they're unlikely to include this in their litter schemes, which is part of the thing. But can I just go to what I was saying before? I've got a little thing here, and this is what they give out to you. Okay, this is why people get hacked off. We're all trying really hard to do the right thing. I don't understand that. I try to understand this, and I read it every single week, and I get it wrong, because next month will be another one, and that'll have changed. And I think people, when did it become our responsibility to recycle? Don't we pay massive amounts, or I'm talking about individuals, when we pay massive amounts of council tax to councils to deal with this? And they're not...
But we're all in it together, aren't we? We all have to make a difference.
We sort of are, but are they doing it? Do we know when it gets recycled it all goes to the right place? Or do we hear stories that it all been dumped together?
We have to trust that if it's being recycled, that it gets recycled.
Well, plenty of stories where it's not.
I think what we need is a bit more transparency to enable us to be a bit more conscious as consumers, because until the Sky campaign, I'd never even considered the concept of single-use plastic. Yeah, I'd never even considered that. But like, on the most basic level, I don't fully understand how this plastic ends up in the oceans. I don't really get the link.
That's something we can explore more another
week. Is that for another week?
It's not going to go away. Unfortunately, the plastic in the ocean is not going anywhere yet. But right now, it's Greg next. Oh, actually, no, that's a mistake. It's me. And of course, speaking of mistakes, I am talking about the Oscars. What happened at this year's Oscars was unbelievable. And no, I'm not talking about Envelope Gate, although that was quite something too. After 2 years in a row where not one single black actor was nominated for an award, this year the Academy finally woke up to the fact that there are incredible films directed by and featuring people of colour. But instead of welcoming this overdue bit of justice, it's been pilloried. One newspaper picked out all the films that had been nominated and gave them a political correctness rating, suggesting that movies like Moonlight were more likely to be recognised because they ticked gay, black and poor boxes. It's outrageous and offensive to suggest the only reason films about black or poor people win awards is because of tokenism. And it's about time that white film critics woke up to the fact that films perfectly capable of winning on merit aren't only about people who look like them.
See, I don't know if I'm just a bit naive or what goes on in my head sometimes, but to me, I don't know. But to me, I don't live my life with the lens of he's black, she's white, he's a man, she's a woman, he's gay, she's not. I don't live like that. And I don't know any of my friends or the people that I hang around with that do. To me, I see people. When I think of that film at the Oscars, I will remember it for two things. The first is the absolute mess of handing out the award. And the second thing is so good I can't remember what it was. But it's like I'd never heard of the movie. I hadn't seen it. No. But I would not think, oh, that's a movie and it's full of black people or white people or Hispanic people. I would just think it's a movie, and I would hope that the movie is good. I haven't seen it. I would hope it's good, and that's why it's won. But then to your point, you just said people would suggest that we're being politically correct by making, diversity and putting diversity. Do you think there's any truth in that? Do you think people are trying to put in,
compensate?
Yeah, do you think there's truth in that?
I don't think there's any truth in that. I think what's happened is that the film industry has historically been massively biased towards films by and about white people. And the balance is starting to be corrected. And obviously, for people who are used to films being about a certain kind of person, that seems like a kind of politically correct diversity drive, when really I think it's just a genuinely fair marketplace. We haven't had a fair marketplace in the fall. We've had an intervention in favour of white films. So when you open it that it's just a market of ideas, then you get diversity on its own because there are these great films. Just to your point about what you said before, I mean, Michelle, I don't know what goes on in your head, and far be it from me to tell you. But generally, I think 2 points to what you said first. I think that and I don't want to be personal, but when a white person says, I don't see race, they're often speaking from a position of privilege where they haven't experienced racism. They are benefiting from structural factors that have historically disadvantaged people of colour. So it's fine for you not to feel conscious of race, and it's great if you don't go around judging people based on their race and gender, but I think it's important to acknowledge that people who are historically disadvantaged and do experience prejudice live in a reality where that is part of every interaction. And just the second thing I want to say, just quickly, about Moonlight, which I have seen, and it's a beautiful film. I actually agree with what you're saying in respect to that film, because people have said it's a gay film, it's a film about gay black people. For anyone who's seen it, it's actually not. It's a beautiful coming-of-age love story, and the fact that the characters are gay and black, for me, was completely secondary. And I think that's why it won, because it's a beautiful film.
But that was your point in your opening, was about merit, and everything has to be... Success has to be measured on merit, because that protects everybody within that space. When we're talking about the film industry, for me, the most disappointing thing, if there is prejudice, in the sense of even if it's very sort of subconscious almost, is the fact that I would hate anybody, whatever their background, not to have equality of opportunity and equality of aspiration. If my world's obviously football, and it would destroy me if I felt that there was a young player who was different for whatever reason, who felt that football wasn't for them. And I would hope that the acting profession would feel the same. Now, it takes time. That's the problem, because you're dealing with historic prejudice, and it does take time. But I absolutely stand with you in the sense that I think it was fantastic that so many different backgrounds were represented at this Oscars, even if the perception is that it's like
I just want to let you hear from the director of Moonlight, because what you're saying is I completely agree with, and the point is that when films like this are recognised, it doesn't just affect their own success, it actually creates change for future generations. A young person now watching the Oscars realises that you can be gay and black and be a successful director. I just want to let you see what Barry Jenkins said.
Do you think it is getting harder to make films like this?
Yes, it is. However, I think when there's a will, there's a way. The reason why the movie cost what it cost and was made as quickly as it was is because that was the best way to make this film, and hopefully the success of our film will make it less difficult and less hard to make these kinds of movies.
He's just acknowledging that it is still difficult to tell those stories, and actually Moonlight won because it was able, on an incredibly low budget, to be completely exceptional, but that's not as much progress as we'd like, because it means that you still have to be that one film that has hardly any resources and still makes it. But hopefully it will open up for more films with bigger budgets.
You say it won because you know, the Academy works. There are 17 branches to the Academy, and to be a member of the Academy, you have to be sponsored by 2 people in the department you want to be in. So there's the writers' part, the script, there's the actors' part, there's directors. There is no conspiracy across 17 branches of the Academy to keep out black actors, black films or black movies. I don't believe that for a second. You've said the last 2 years...
Well, that's not what the Academy said last year.
Well, no,
the Academy said itself that it didn't think it was ethnically mixed. And
it wasn't representative.
What it's done is made it more representative this year.
Can I finish the point? The one thing the whole Academy votes on, all 17 branches, is the best movie. And hey presto, Moonlight won the best movie because everybody thought it was the best movie. Well, and that's the point.
I mean, I've watched I'm vice president of BAFTA, so I've watched virtually all the movies this year, and it's quite interesting. I watched Moonlight. I wouldn't have voted for it as the best film. I thought, we're all entitled to an opinion. I thought it was a good film, but I didn't think it was great. I personally thought Manchester by the Sea was the best of the films that I watched. But I mean, we should accept the Academy got pilloried last year because there were no black nominees, and they did change their structure and system quite rightly, so that
so is that positive?
BAFTA is
positive discrimination?
No, it's saying look, we're not reflecting what this society is today. We're not reflecting it, and that applies to so many things in any society. And it needs a shock like the Academy had last year to actually do something.
But can I just ask you about the last 2 years? Is it conceivable that perhaps there weren't enough films, the films that starred black actors, and if you want to call them black movies, is it conceivable they just weren't good enough?
If that were the case, I would be the first to admit it. But it's
You're
not.
Say aren't you?
There were films and there were people who were overlooked last year. Now, I am not for one person saying that films featuring or written or directed by black people should be nominated just to give the appearance of diversity. That's exactly what I'm arguing against. I'm saying there should be a system based on merit. It hasn't been. And to go to your point about the Academy, which is still, by the way, overwhelmingly white and male, even though they have admitted hundreds of new members who
It doesn't mean they can't recognise a good movie that stars a black actor.
It's not about a conspiracy, Carol. It's about unconscious bias. It's about the proven fact that people are more likely to vote for and relate to people who look and come from backgrounds like them.
Isn't the arts the one area where there is diversity and tolerance?
Clearly not.
No, if you read what Spike Lee said after last year's ceremony, he said, as I see it, the Academy Awards is not where the real battle is.
Yes.
It's in the executive office of the Hollywood studios and TV and cable networks. This is where the gatekeepers decide what gets made and what gets jettisoned.
And subject matter.
To turn around, yes. And
subject matter, I think, that does play a part.
I'm not sure I totally agree with this, because I think one of the things that people do when they're making movies, if they think there's a chance of getting an Academy Award, they will put the effort in.
You just have to listen to the experiences of black actors. Remember when the Sony hack happened and emails were leaked from Sony executives, and one of them said, a senior Sony person said, Denzel Washington, great, we'd love to cast him in a lead role in this film, but, people just don't like watching films with black actors. Take someone like Zoe Kravitz, who's doing incredibly well, a mixed heritage African-American actress, who said that the best she can hope for is to be the best friend of the white girl, and she was turned down for even auditioning for Batman because they said they didn't want to go further with the film. There is so much prejudice in the industry.
There is plenty of black actors who have been recognised. Tell Denzel Washington there's prejudice in Hollywood. Tell Samuel L. Jackson.
He's one of the people talking about
but these people have been recognised for a long time. The very first person to win, the first black person to win an Academy Award was Hattie McDaniel, who won the Best Supporting Actress in 1939.
And do you know what role she was playing, Carol?
Yes,
she was playing the slave in a film that glorified slavery, and that's the reality.
But that was the times.
A lot of films where black actors have been cast, they have to be about slavery, or the black person has to be playing
the problem with you bringing this today, this is your subject today, is a lot of people out there watching will say, well, you would say this because of
colour. How come none of you were bringing it?
Because of colour.
How come I'm the only one who's bringing it?
I would have done, but you got there first.
When I ran the BBC and made a big thing about a more fairer and open employment policy, I also used to write, when people used to write and say, I didn't get this job because I'm black, I used to write back and say, well, that could be the case, or it could be that you didn't get it because there was a better candidate.
If
that's the danger you face.
If there were an even playing field, then any black person who didn't get a job would be able to say, I know it's a fair system and I didn't get the job on merit. As long as you have the perception of bias and as long as you have real examples of bias.
But people aren't that rational in their behaviour. They got turned down for something.
I want to make a really quick final point on this. I've got 2 godsons who I adore who are mixed race. They're quite young. One's pretty much a teenager. And I've lost count of how many times I've heard my best friend, their mum, saying to these kids, look, because you're black, people will think this, so you have to do this, and people will think... And that's been put into them by my best friend since they've been growing up all the time, and I say to her all the time, why do you keep reinforcing to me that it's 2 kids?
Yeah.
Maybe
she's preparing them for what she's experienced is the message that they're going to be getting from society. I'm not going to comment on how anyone should raise their children, but the reality is, I grew up with parents who never spoke about race. They said, you just be yourself, you can do whatever you want to do. I learnt about race myself out in the world, in the playground, in the job market, because people kept telling me what I could and couldn't be because of my race. So regardless of what your parents tell you, you will experience that. This is a society that is highly prejudiced based on race and visible difference, and that's just the reality.
Wouldn't it be worse if black actors got given accolades and awards to tick some diversity box? How insulting to them, how patronising to them.
Afra's key point is about merit, and that is the essence of what she's saying. Everything based on merit.
And talking about merit, it is time now for this week's Straight Talker Award. Luckily, there are no envelopes involved. Now, I've never been a Harry Potter fan, but this picture from a Vanity Fair shoot with feminist cheerleader Emma Watson that also appeared on page 3 of The Sun is quite eye-catching, to say the least. And this was the response from journalist and talk show host Julia Hartley-Brewer. Emma Watson. Feminism, gender wage gap. Why oh why am I not taken seriously? Feminism. Oh, and here are my tits. And for that, Julia, I say you are this week's Straight Talker of the Week. Guys, discuss.
Do you mean that in a good way? Because I actually think she's right about that.
What do I can hear sighing?
Because Emma Watson's the person who, she's very, she puts herself out there with causes and good causes and stuff, and then and she's quite right. She gets that.
I don't know why anyone would take Julia Hartley-Brewer seriously as someone who speaks about feminism, because that is not feminism. That is, you're allowed to be taken seriously as a woman as long as you play by these rules. And these rules involve not enjoying your femininity, not wearing what you want, not defining how you want to appear based on yourself, but on what we tell you.
She's not doing
David Beckham gets his balls out on adverts. Nobody says.
Only his footballs.
Nobody says. You're blushing. Nobody says he can't be an icon, he can't be taken seriously. Why, as a woman, if you want to wear that in an ad or on TV or in the media, do you suddenly lose any right to be taken seriously?
Hear.
Wow, he gets his balls out. I'm going to research harder, I think.
Anyway, paraphrasing. But.
Anyway, that's it from us for this week. Let us know if you think any of us deserve an award, and if so, in what category. Brace yourself, panel. Goodbye.